and welcome once again to RPMbassy. Today we're going to be keeping the Japan theme going from last week. Let's call it Japanuary, why not? Today we're going to be talking about a soundtrack that I feel like a lot of people have seen this film these days, or at the very least you've heard of it. And it is the soundtrack to the amazing film Spirited Away. So this is a 2020 pressing. It was like a reissue of the album. The film itself is from 2001 and was originally released as, we originally had a soundtrack released in 2001 as well. But yeah, this is a 2020 vinyl pressing, and it's a really nice sort of package, if you will. So I'll talk about some of the music, talk about some of the presentation of the bits and pieces inside here. So yeah, let's get started. So yeah, we'll start off with the presentation of it itself. Obviously a lovely cover, and different to what you may be familiar with on the CD version, or if you've seen it on streaming sites and the like. Normally we have a picture of the main character, Sen or Chihiro, depending on where she is within her story. But this is instead a picture of the bathhouse, and actually it kind of creates a much more mystical feel, which I really like. You can, just at the top there, actually see the sort of original image that's used on the CD and all the other formats as well on the Obi strip. But I really like the choice to have this. It kind of, as I say, a little bit more mystical, a little bit more toned down and less heavy in terms of the sort of features. It's just a nice piece of art, kind of brings it up a little bit. So yeah, internally we've got, again, some lovely art stills from the film. Nice huge one there, and then a smaller piece there. Lovely stuff. And the back, your track listing, and again another still from the film. So all of the text-based content on this is all in Japanese, so don't expect me to read any of it. I cannot. But yeah, we'll talk about the production of this. So as with most, if not all, of the Studio Ghibli films, this was composed by Joe Hisaishi, which I found out recently, that's not his real name. I guess you perhaps could discern that from the fact that his first name, his professional name is Joe, but yeah, that isn't his real name actually. But we'll call him Joe Hisaishi for the sake of this. So yeah, this is all composed by him, and then the majority of it is composed by the New Japan Philharmonic Orchestra. And a fantastic job they do as well. Not only is it incredibly well performed, but it is a masterfully written soundtrack. It's such a well put together and nostalgic sounding soundtrack. And I think that's something that Hisaishi really does hit the nail on the head, time and time again. He has this uncanny sort of nostalgic feel to how he writes, and the very similar to Nobuo Uematsu, the way he will kind of really be quite sort of stubborn with motifs in his songs. He really does love to kind of repeat and remind you of themes throughout his soundtracks and throughout films and things, and it does such a wonderful way of connecting scenes together. And I think it's especially present in this, and all the stronger for it. So if you're not familiar with the film, it is a 2001 Studio Ghibli film directed by Hayao Miyazaki, and if you've seen any of their other stuff, it's sort of par for the course in a way. You sort of know what you're getting at with them. It's a very sort of based on kind of those sort of childhood morals and sort of fantastical sort of fantasy settings, but sort of tries to be sort of grounded within the real world as well. I mean, it is a phenomenal film, and I think this score really serves the film so perfectly narratively. and I really, really think like the music contributed to how successful the film ended up being. It really does kind of create a mood, which I think, so many films kind of miss out on. And the beautiful thing is, and something that I really love, is that some of these tracks, this will sound weird, but they almost sit in the background, and obviously it's background music, yes, but there are songs that I've gone back and listened to just as music, realised that they are, incredibly intricate and incredibly beautiful tracks, but actually there's so much sort of present on the screen. It's such a feast for the eyes visually to watch this film that in some ways, some of these tracks, intricate though they may be, they almost get a little bit lost in the shuffle. So I think having this as a way to be able to just listen to it outright without, I don't want to call the film a distraction, but without the distraction of the film is really nice. And regardless of whether or not you have a copy like this, I definitely suggest going out and just listening to the music, because that, I think, is a crowning achievement of any soundtrack, is that they've managed to make music that not only fits thematically and suits the media that it's supporting, but is also just great music in its own right. And there are many soundtrack writers that cannot do that or never achieve that, but Hisaishi, time and time again, manages to make melodies and songs which I certainly go back to completely independent of the films that they're from, just to enjoy as music. I would really like to point out as well some cool little details with the pressings themselves. So it's a 2 LP set, and they are heavy LPs at that. They are very thick, very chunky. But some nice artwork on the labels. Really love that. Just a lovely little presentation all in all. But my favourite thing is the fact that this is actually only a 3-sided soundtrack. So side D, you inherently have to have a side D when you've got 2 discs. I will show you in just a moment. So there's side C. Side D, you do still have the artwork, of course, but if I can get that in the right angle, you might just be able to see some lovely little etched artwork there. Quite hard to see, but just a really nice little touch that I think just adds that little bit extra. And, the side had to exist anyway, right? So why not? So, on to some of the tracks. The one that most people probably will have heard of is track 1 on this, One Summer's Day. That's kind of the iconic Spirited Away song. Funnily enough, it's not the one that I kind of associate with the film as much as some of the other ones, but it's the one that is sort of, quite possibly is Studio Ghibli's kind of like biggest song. Alongside something like Path of the Wind from the My Neighbor Totoro soundtrack. Those are kind of what I would say are iconic tracks for the studio as a whole, and their sort of body of work. But One Summer's Day, a very simple sort of piano piece to start off with, and it is really, really sort of nostalgic and melancholic, but hopeful and wistful, and there's so much sort of expressed within sort of a small amount of notation, but it's really, really beautifully done. And it kind of swells into this amazing sort of orchestral piece, and that kind of, it is almost kind of the pinnacle of the soundtrack in a way. You kind of have that as your first song, and that's already it. Within the film, I believe you do hear it a couple of times, but it doesn't really hit until right towards the end of the film. You've almost kind of, you're in the third act really before you properly hear it and it's properly presented at the forefront. As I say, I believe it does play early on, but it's certainly the focal point later on in the film. And I sort of find it a bit odd that it's track 1 on the disc, but it's more readily present later on in the film itself. Another great track, The Dragon Boy, that's track 5. So I didn't realise what this song was called. I knew the song itself, but while it makes sense that it's called that, the events that take place within the film when you first hear it are not really relevant to the character that it refers to at the time, or at least to begin with. He is within the scene, but it's a weird choice to call it that, but again, thematically it does fit. And I will say as well, with regards to themes, even taking the titles away, the mood of the tracks does do a very good job of following the film's narrative, which, just going back to how thought out and well-fitting these tracks are and how good all of his music really is as an actual soundtrack. I think, you could almost, even if you hadn't seen the film and you just listened to the music, you could almost sort of piece together a narrative for yourself that wouldn't be a million miles off. One of my favourite tracks on here is Day of the River. So this is where he does that kind of chucking the melody, the motif from another track on. So he brings One Summer's Day and he puts that as kind of it's almost like a supporting part in Day of the River. And there's this really nice, I think it must be a synthesized part that's just a constant ostinato throughout the entire track. And the way that counterplays with the One Summer's Day melody behind the rest of this music, it changes the mood of it entirely. It's a really remarkable look into how music theory works, the way that two chord voicings that have particular feelings in their own right can come together and form an entirely new feeling. And yeah, masterfully done. I think a lot of this is composed out of emotion, but it's very apparent that he really does know his chops when it comes to the theoretical side of it, and there's a real cleverness to what he's done with it. Another fantastic track, Bathhouse Morning. So this is a great song for waking up in the morning, the sort of slow build, and there's a real quirkiness to a lot of the songs, which they are borderline silly, and I really adore this track in particular for like really pushing into that kind of feeling. There's a lot of like woodwinds, and there lots of sort of staccato dum 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 dum, and it's again narratively the events that are taking place aren't necessarily the nicest things, but the way that they're sort of handled, the music kind of it keeps the levity throughout, which means that even though there are sometimes sort of depressing or upsetting things that might take place, or even scary things that might take place, it sort of keeps it from being too inappropriate for what really would have been its target audience in children. And again, the ability for the songs to change the mood of the film from visually and thematically having quite dark tones at times to be able to keep a sort of baseline, it really is just a magical approach to the composition. Now you may want to pick up a copy for yourself, and the good news is it's actually not that bad price-wise. I was quite surprised. I pre-ordered this back when it first came out, and I pre-ordered it just out of safety, essentially. I assumed this was going to be an absolutely hot ticket item, and for me it is, and I don't regret the pre-order at all. But yeah, it's still pretty easily available. If you look on places like Discogs and stuff like that, it's still basically going for the standard price. So really, for a double LP with the nice sort of artwork and the etched D side and stuff like that, just like nice little extras, and the fact that it is such a fantastic soundtrack, you know, for like 35, 40 quid, like it's not that bad. I say go for it. If you've got any sort of interest in soundtracks, or especially anime film soundtracks, I mean, this is a no-brainer in my opinion. And chances are, if you do have that sort of interest, you've probably already got this anyway. But yeah, I absolutely recommend picking up for that price. Like, it's a bargain. This is the kind of thing, you know, you don't even need to be interested in the film to put on and enjoy. And this is the kind of thing that you can put on, and even if there's other people in the room, they'll probably appreciate the fact that this is playing. It's always nice to have this kind of music on. I think for 40 quid, let's say 40 quid, like, yeah, you might as well. This is a nice presentation, a great sounding album. Yeah, you'd be a fool not to. Anyway, that's it for this week. Next week we'll probably do some more Japanese stuff. I'm just going to keep the ball rolling with that, because why the hell not? And there's plenty of albums that I want to talk about from Japan. So let's do it next week. See you here again. Cheers. Thank you.